Hi, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Just going to let a couple more folks get in here before we get underway. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you all for making time for today's call, for today's conversation, expecting it to be hopefully really informative, really interesting for the folks involved. Excited to have the panel that we have here today to discuss this topic. We are, just to make sure you're in the right place, we're discussing assessing clinical quality in digital health software. This is a DIME webinar that we're excited to bring these fine folks with us today. Go through a couple of housekeeping items here, which is we will be recording this meeting. If you so we ask you not to record it, but it'll be available on our events page once we get it loaded up, so don't need to do that. Please feel free to use the chat feature for your questions, though I'll say at the top, the questions that we'll be able to answer will be done after the webinar, and really please include them in the chat then with who you actually wanted to direct it to. We've got a panel Q&A that's going to be a bit more moderated and tight just to make sure we're on time and on topic. But we do want to make sure that we're attentive to your questions as well. So please don't hesitate to use that chat feature, and we'll be sure to get back to you. The format of today's webinar is going to be a little bit of presentation here at the front to set the stage, and then we're going to be shifting over to that Q&A that I mentioned. I'd like to, before I get further, actually ask my panelists to jump in here and introduce themselves. And I'll start with Jordan, if you can start.
Thanks so much, Doug. And I appreciate the Digital Medicine Society's partnership. And thank you for the opportunity to present. For those I have not met, I'm Jordan Silberman, a Director of Clinical Analytics within Elevance Health. I sit in our Office of Medical Policy and Technology Assessment, and I also lead our Digital Health Evidence Council, where we perform rigorous rapid clinical evidence assessments to identify digital health products we think are most likely to improve health outcomes for our 45 million members. And I'm excited for the conversation. Thanks.
Let's go to Joe. You're next on my screen.
Hi, Doug. Thank you guys very much for inviting us to join. I'm super excited. I'm Joe Masterson. I am the CEO and co-founder at Tomorrow. We are a digital health company focused in delivering kind of behavioral science-based programs digitally to expand access to quality care. And we sell mostly to employers, states, and health plans right now. I'm a nurse with an MBA and also the PI on some of our NIH grants.
Thanks, Joe. Good to have you. Scott?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the panel today. I'm Scott Taylor. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Perks Health. Perks Health, we help health plans, in particular Medicare and Medicaid plans, digitally extend their care management activities by engaging their high-risk members daily at scale. And we do so to improve those members' adherence to their care plans, ultimately improve their quality and health outcomes, and drive down total cost of care.
Super. Thanks, Scott. And Fred?
Hi, good morning. My name is Fred Chang. I am a Chief Medical Information Officer in a health system called Amvita Health, which is located in the southwest corner of Arizona. In addition, I also am a member of the American Osteopathic Information Association, which DIME has a partnership. So really excited to be able to participate today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fred. I think it's lost on no one here that we have three very different perspectives for the call today, very intentionally, from the payer, the provider, and then the developer of these products that we're talking about today. Really quickly, myself, Doug Mirsky, I oversee the DIME seal for us. If you don't know what that is, hopefully you will before the end of this conversation. I'll run through it a little bit. My background, other than overseeing the Dime Seal for us, is I was a founder of a digital health startup myself, so have lived a little bit in the shoes of a couple of the panelists on the call here, and excited for the conversation today. And so with that, let me jump in here, and you're going to hear me talking for a little bit, but I will try to make it not too painful. So starting with us. So for the folks who have never heard of Dime, we're a mission-driven not-for-profit. Our focus is to advance the safe, effective, and equitable use of digital approaches to redefine healthcare and improve lives. It's what we do. It's all we do. We are working to try and bring in these incredible digital innovations to make sick care into healthcare and to make patient lives better. We do this by working towards convening and collaborating with our ecosystem partners. It's a massive ecosystem. Our superpower is to bring these folks together. We aren't a white paper factory, though. We strive to move the market to the benefit of patient care by building and leading with solutions that make it easier for digital innovation to make an impact. And we combine all of this to educate the market and participants so that they can move with us towards what better will be. We've been doing this for a number of years. We've had the benefit of working with quite a large number of ecosystem partners, from pharma to health systems, startups to biotech, patients to engineers, and well beyond. We have moved ourselves in quite a variety of different places within this ecosystem to adhere to our mission and to try and move the digital health and digital medicine forward. But we're here in particular, we're sort of all together because of what we started with the Dime Seal. I mentioned to you that we convene all of these folks, and we tend to work on projects as part of Dime. But over the course of the past several years and doing the numerous projects that we've done, one aspect to digital health that we saw needed some attention was the moment where there's the developer and the buyer of those products. And that conversation had gotten stuck in the mud. And that was really the genesis for the Dime Seal. The problem really that we identified is that in looking into it, evaluating these digital health software products really is an exercise in confronting the Wild West. There's about 350,000 of these or so out there. You've got about 6,000 or so hospitals just within the US alone. We've heard now from quite a large number of hospitals that it takes anywhere from 75 to 150 hours of time to review a single product. And so I don't think it's overstating it, but the math problem you get to when you multiply 350,000 by 6,000 by 100 hours is astronomical. And it really is the Wild West. There are thousands of unknown developers to all of these folks who are trying to identify the right products to work with. Hospitals, many of whom have limited to no resources to actually review them quickly, effectively. And there's as many sources of guidance out there for the buyers to have to consider as there are risks in the selection of any of the solutions. The process of trying to identify and adopt digital health software products is broken. And so that left us with the problem to go and attack. And that's really what we are trying to accomplish with the Dime Seal. And so we do what we did, we did what we do, which is we went out there to see what exists already to try and solve for this. And we reviewed thousands of scientific articles, regulatory guidances, and quite a large number of KOL conversations. And we identified really a large set of benchmarks and standards, and found the need to pull that all together to map out what was necessary for a product to be built with quality and trust. And that's really what we are trying to accomplish with the Dime Seal. We took that mapping, we worked with, as we do, folks across the market. We convened an independent governance committee that's here to help us review and hone the framework that we ultimately established. And it looks something like this. We identified really three domains: evidence, privacy and security, and usability. But what you see within each of those three domains are quite a large number of other aspects. It's not just evidence, privacy, and security and usability. It's deployment maintenance. It's end user experience and accessibility. There's so many sub-criteria to each of these domains that are important to be able to clear in order for us to all collectively get to that place of quality and trust. However, for today, we're really focusing on that bottom left box, which is clinical evidence. That's going to be the source of the conversation here today. Excited to have these folks on with us, and it was really what brought Elevance and Dime together. And happy to have Jordan talk about it during his section here too. But clinical effectiveness is such a uniquely important aspect to digital health software product development. These products have to work, or we risk damaging the whole industry. And so for us as a not-for-profit in this space, it felt really important to make sure we had clinical effectiveness covered. So we engaged in this collaboration with Elevance Health that happened as of May 15th of this year to provide a first of its kind pathway. The pathway is intended to allow digital health software products, we use the acronym in these slides here, DHSPs, but digital health software products to receive a transparent assessment of their clinical quality and to differentiate in the crowded market so that buyers, adopters can also then start to look for this symbol to know that it has gone through this process and to hopefully accelerate their ability to select these products. The products that go through this pathway is a subset of the broader collection of digital health products that the Dime seal wraps its arms around. And so we put that here on the bottom, that it is those products that are patient-facing and they improve health outcomes or they enhance the health maintenance of patients. That's the subset of all the products that the Dime seal covers, where we're leveraging this pathway that we've developed, this collaboration with Elevance Health. And the goal here is hopefully not surprising to anybody, but it's to enhance the trust, right? We want to make sure that by doing this, we're providing more clarity to the market, more clarity to the buyers, more clarity to the developers to understand what the buyer set is looking for. So it is to enhance trust across this whole space. It's to promote this culture of responsibility and accountability in the space, intended to empower each of the stakeholders with the tools that they need, since our framework is transparent and available to folks, so that they can make their decisions for themselves based off of, that transparent framework and whether or not somebody has achieved and accomplished the award of a Dime seal with a favorable assessment in clinical effectiveness from Elevance. And then lastly is to accelerate innovation. That's hugely important to us. We want to get to identifying these products quickly so that there is the ability for the buyers to adopt it perhaps more quickly than they were able to do in the past, because they can count on this at least rising to that baseline threshold of quality and trust that we're looking to establish, that we have established with the Dime seal. And so I'll end quickly with, these are folks who have already gone through. I'll highlight Joe and Scott introduced themselves, but Tomorrow and Perks Health are two on here that have gone through this particular pathway with Elevance. Not all of these have, but those two have. And so I want to call attention to that because they have gone through this extra layer of clinical effectiveness, and we're excited to share that on their behalf and with them. But across the Dime seal, though we are new, we have been really excited at the response we've seen and the products that have gone through the Dime seal process, already impacting hundreds of thousands of patients just by way of borrowing all of the patients that each of these products have interacted with. And then those platform partners such as Digital.Health and Galen Growth Health Tech Alpha, those are incorporating these Dime seal awarded products with an extra layer of being able to find and identify those products that have achieved this level of recognition. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Jordan. to discuss why is evidence quality critical for digital health software products. And Jordan, you're just going to need to tell me next, and I'll advance them for you if that works for you.
That works very good. Thanks, Doug. Next, please. I'll share a few specific, simple examples here to provide a little bit more context. Next slide, please. This is an anonymized version of real reporting from a digitally delivered smoking cessation program. And here you can see in these data simulated for illustrative purposes, a 70% rate of program participants saying they have quit smoking, and 5% actually responding to the smoking cessation survey. And this is a common pattern, and this is a concern when we see this, because of course those who don't answer the survey may be more likely to still be smoking. And when we see these really high smoking cessation rates that are more than twice as great as the rates, for example, seen with Chantix, we have to pause, and this kind of evidence is not particularly actionable. Of course, it doesn't give us a high level of confidence that we're really looking at a real clinical benefit here. Next slide, please. Here's one example of a product that took a more actionable approach to generating evidence, and this happens to be the Tomorrow Breathe Bundle smoking cessation product, and the details are available at the URL shown, but they took appropriate steps in optimizing collection of those self-report data, really minimizing missing data. And it's that you're never going to get missingness down to zero, but then they took appropriate steps as well to analyze those missing data per best practices and to perform robustness checks and so on. And that gives us more confidence, and it makes the reporting, makes the evidence more actionable, makes the product more likely to be something we can consider adopting. So we look at things like that very closely. Next slide, please. Another concern we encounter often is risk for reporting bias. And this is an issue that arises particularly in an underregulated context. Given business pressures, it may be the case that very often we are only seeing the very most favorable sliver of the outcomes curve. And so often we're left with the possibility that the data we are shown is not representative, and a established solution to that problem is the use of prospective registration of studies. And next slide. That is a step that was taken appropriately in a recent clinical trial of the Perks Health platform, and that's one reason why we were able to have a little more confidence in the favorable clinical outcomes that we saw when this product was tested. Next slide, please. So those are a few examples, and gosh, I could talk about evidence quality criteria for hours, but it suffices to say here that the details really matter, and we're really looking at those closely because they are one of the best tools we have to identify what products may genuinely improve the health of our members. Next slide, please. the evidence-defined framework we were privileged to develop in collaboration with Digital Medicine Society. And this framework really provides a structured way to address the kinds of evidence quality details that I just outlined. For those not familiar, I would encourage you to take a look at this resource. And this is one of the key resources that we utilize when assessing clinical evidence for digital health products. And next slide, I think with that, I will turn it back to you, Doug. Thank you.
Great. So with that, you have already heard Jordan and I go through some slides. My lights have just gone off in my room. I'm too still. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pull everybody up so we can start in a conversation here. So give me 1 second. Great. So what I'd like to do, if my panelists can just sort of remember they're on mute, but so please go off mute. And I want to start with a question. Perhaps it's a little bit of a softball, perhaps not. I welcome a little bit of cynicism or contrarianism to a degree for this one, but does this clinical effectiveness assessment, does actually looking deeply at this, doesn't matter, right? I'll remind everybody again, we happen to have 3 incredibly important constituents to this ecosystem on this panel, from the payers to the providers to the developers of these products. So does establishing good clinical effectiveness matter? We can go free for all so that I don't have to keep pointing at folks. Whoever feels like jumping in on this, I welcome it.
Sure, I'll jump in because I told you I'm always happy to talk. Yes, it does matter. And especially I think to us, it's what's appropriate for the product we're taking to market, right? So if it's an engagement tool, then the data you're looking at is different than if it's actually trying to change a health behavior or change a health outcome. If we're trying to affect a health outcome, then I think in healthcare, we want things to be safe and effective. I'm a clinician. That's what we've been trained on. That's what we expect. That's what we want, I think, as patients and people in general. So absolutely. And I would say that it depends on what your product is, right? What your focus is.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I think there's probably kind of 2 key reasons why it's super important, particularly as a digital health startup. I think the first is actually one of the slides you shared a little earlier, Doug, when we were talking about the number of interventions or number of digital health software products out there and the number of customers or hospitals that are evaluating them. I mean, we talk about like the overburden that kind of puts on hospitals, but I think the other challenge is if you're putting yourself in the digital health product shoes is how do you stand out when you've got only so many customers and 350,000 solutions? And one of the clear ways of standing out, and potentially the reason that Joe and I are on this call, is by being able to demonstrate that you actually have clinical evidence, because it's crazy in some ways, and we definitely found this when we were kind of building Perks for the first time, how many of those 350,000 have not a shred of clinical evidence. I think Jordan pulled out some really important things around the quality of that evidence, but there's also a bunch of solutions out there that have nothing. And it's not even biased evidence, it's no evidence. And so I think that is like at the starting line, how do you stand out from those other 300,000? I think that the second most important thing is longevity. Like maybe a bit of hype, maybe a bit of marketing will help you secure that initial contract, maybe with a smaller plan or a smaller provider. I think most of the large plans and providers are pretty attuned to this from the get-go now. But beyond that 6-month pilot or 12-month pilot, you need to be able to show results. And you need to be able to show results for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because that's what you're going to be assessed on as to whether that goes to a multi-year scale up. But 2, because more and more payers and providers are expecting you to go at risk in some shape or form. And so ultimately, you should want to know the clinical impact or the health impact or the cost impact of your product, because ultimately, if you can't deliver on it, you're going to lose the contract and probably not going to get paid. And so, maybe that's the selfish reason for a digital health startup to really know that it can deliver on the promises that it makes, is because ultimately the long-term viability of your company depends on it. And it's probably not even that long-term anymore. It's probably like, can you get beyond the first 6 months of working with a customer?
Sure, and I'll jump in, kind of echoing Scott. I mean, as the Chief Medical Information Officer of a health system, uh, I kind of look at it the same way, but I look at it from a procurement and sustainability perspective, right? So from a health system, the first thing that we look at, and basically the Chief Medical Officer a lot of times refer, developers to me to kind of assess is, does it align with our strategical goals? And pretty much every health system is going to tell you that the clinical evidence, which then drives quality, is a strategic goal. So obviously we have to understand, what does this meet our stakeholders, both providers and patients? And from there, a lot of times we actually take products, potentially pitches, talk to our SMEs, which, small health systems might just be like a medical director or a CMO, chief medical officer, versus larger health systems. They have a large, something like a clinical consensus group, basically a bunch of doctors who will come in, kind of talk about, what is the medicine behind it. On top of it, the workflows. A lot of times we kind of think of workflows as a detached process, but they usually align with the clinical treatment process. So that's also something that we kind of take into account. And then finally, again, echoing Scott about sustainability, long term, we, at least most health systems, those that are robust, have KPIs or key performance indicators. And usually some of those metrics are clinical based. So usually clinical evidence will demonstrate improvement in those KPIs. So if those KPIs kind of go awry, then, does a health system want to continue to have partnership with that developer or vendor, that comes for annual review. So that's kind of my perspective from that, from the payer or provider side.
I suspect folks know where I stand on this, and we believe that evidence is critical in this space, and so often, right, we've seen cases where we adopt a digital health product and we maybe don't see the kinds of clinical impact that we had hoped for, and really the clinical evidence is one of the best tools we have to predict what's going to really improve the health of our members. So.
So in order to prove this clinical effectiveness, this clinical evidence, Joe and Scott have had to jump through hoops, pay a lot of money, spend a lot of time. And so, my heart bleeds as a former startup founder. Joe and Scott, can you talk about how do you manage to do this, right? With all of the multiple priorities, with the pressures from boards, venture chairs, the market, how do you spend the money that's necessary to get to the point of clinical effectiveness?
Want to go first this time, Scott?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a couple of things. I mean, it kind of one of my when a lot of digital health founders kind of ask for advice, my biggest thing is like just start capturing data early. Like I think sometimes we can put I think we obviously want to get to like the gold standard of clinical evidence. I think hopefully every person in healthcare wants to kind of be able to demonstrate that. But I think that the thing I probably didn't realize as not a clinician, and I'm kind of very open about that when we started Perks, was just that there are different levels of evidence that you can achieve along the way, whether that's a retrospective analysis of the data that you have, whether it's prospective analysis of specific data, whether it's a full-blown randomized controlled trial, published in global journals. Like there's stages along the way, and I think the important thing is just get started in kind of being able to prove out some impact, some evidence, and then acknowledge the limitations of that evidence. And I think, don't try and pretend it's something that it's not. But I think, that's probably how I'd say, like, how do you graduate and grow the evidence base with the startup journey? I think the other kind of thing I'd say is like clinical evidence isn't window dressing if you're a digital health product. Like, it shouldn't be seen as like, oh, it's kind of this discretionary budget that if we have a bit of cash left over from our capital raise, maybe we're going to do some clinical research. And for the reasons that everyone just articulated, like it is really kind of whether your startup will live or die will be based on like, are you actually able to deliver on the results that you're promising? And also like from a business strategy sense, like how can you model out the impact of the startup if the reason you get paid, if you get paid for reducing HbA1c, but you actually don't know scientifically what the impact of, and in a kind of non-unbiased way, what the impact of your product would be on HbA1c when rolled out across a large population. Like you can't actually credibly predict the impact of your business and or what the impact of the kind of rollout with a large payer would be or a large provider would be.
Yeah, I think we have very much the same as far as one thing that Scott said. We really look at evidence as a body of evidence. So we didn't start by making up shit, right? I mean, we looked at what existing evidence was out there. We had a gap in care we identified that we wanted to address. We looked at the evidence that already existed. We looked at the behavioral model that we were using. Is there already evidence that this works in other modalities, right? And so we had good reason to believe, so we can stand on the shoulder of the giants before us. And that's part of what we would consider our body of evidence. We use a behavioral model called acceptance and commitment therapy. There are lots of studies already show that can be used in all of the programs that we offer. We have lots of evidence showing we can effectively deliver these programs digitally. So instead of it trying to be each thing as a standalone, we try to say, does this build upon our body of evidence, our understanding of how we can deliver these things effectively? And maybe there's places where we can even do better, and that's usually an access than we could do in person. And there might be places where we shouldn't play because we can't do as well as an in-person thing, right? And those are some of the things you can learn over time. I think the cost and time thing are two things. I would say they're equally painful in a startup type world. We funded most of our research either through collaborations with other researchers who were already doing research in this area and were excited to do something in the digital space, right? Can they deliver their program digitally? That leveraged us to be able to kind of both put resources in, do it a lot cheaper for us. It was a third-party study, so that's more credible. I think when we hand it over to somebody like Jordan, it's a little scarier because we're not the ones that are going to write that at the end of the day. But what we're trying to figure out is, are we on the right track? Is this working? Is this work continuing? Then I think those are super powerful. In addition, we look to grants. So I agree. I think we haven't found that investors are super excited to invest in research, to fund that. And so we've gotten grants from Washington State, the Life Science Discovery Fund grant. That's actually a repayable grant, so we do have to pay that back. And we're in the process of doing that. And then from the NIH as well ourselves. But also this partnering, we've partnered with researchers at Fred Hutch Cancer Center, at Seattle Children's, at UW, University of New Mexico, where we have researchers who are experts in their specific area. Maybe it's pain, maybe it's cessation, and this behavioral model. And so that really allowed us to go longer, but it's a very long time. You have to apply for the grant. You have to write the grant. Then you have to get the grant. Then you have to wait till they finally send you some money and get started. Then you do the building part. Then you do the research. Then you analyze it. Then you publish it. And then, now you can go to phase 2, right? So I think these are a very long process. Our cessation program, which is the one Jordan mentioned, the first randomized controlled trial we did on that was in 2014. Phase 3 clinical trial was done in 2020. Well, was published in 2020. Those were done by our research partners at the Hutch, but that's a long timeline. And I think one thing we love about partnering with researchers is they have, which is near and dear to my heart, probably as a nurse, but they really are looking at underserved populations. Can we expand access to care? They recruited from every state in the nation, all the minority groups, rural, all the hard to treat people. Now, at the end of the day, when you're showing your data next to the people who said, hey, who's the best user for this and who will get the most value, that can be a little challenging too, because now we have a different group. And this is, I think, back to the challenge of really understanding what the data is. How do you compare, you know, apples to oranges in there? I went a little long, but we partner with people and look at grants to help fund the research part, and then you know, clients and investors to help fund the commercialization side.
Fred, if you don't mind, I want to turn to you on this because you spoke really elegantly earlier about this is important, right? This is important from the perspective of the provider. But can you talk a little bit about the priority of it and the sense of when is good enough? Like, how do you triage that now? Right? Is this priority number one? And the first conversation has to lead with, here's proof that we are good. Obviously, there has to be a need, or else you're not going to have a conversation. Maybe that's not obvious, but where do you fit clinical effectiveness as a priority? And what is good enough for you guys from the provider perspective to be able to at least pilot?
Sure. I think a lot of health systems now, especially in the way that technology is evolving. I mean, for some of the developers who might have just started, I mean, believe it or not, health systems actually have potentially VC arms within their health systems now. And so I think there is an appetite for more of a risk to try and pilot. But I kind of emphasize that, you know, in order for a product to make it out of a pilot, I mean, the clinical evidence is absolutely important. And really, if your product doesn't generate a financial ROI, I mean, the clinical evidence becomes paramount to sustaining the contract with a health system. So for me, I think it's absolutely important that our providers, at least in the health system perspective, concur that there is good clinical evidence that whatever we're about to adopt is going to be used. Otherwise, if your workflow requires a provider interaction, if they don't believe that there's clinical evidence to perform what you have to do, and that product requires time or effort from a clinician standpoint, I mean, you're going to lose their interest very quickly. So clinicians are very data-driven. Just from the beginning of training, you know, we're trained to read journals and look through what are the outcomes so that, you know, we're practicing the best medicine possible. So it's paramount from a sustainability perspective.
And Jordan, I'll sort of throw a similar-ish kind of question to you, which it's obviously this is important to you. You're here and you're doing this with us. But can you sort of share with me the why this is important from the payer perspective? Why does this matter to you guys?
Yeah, and a lot of this we've touched on, and we noted that there are more than 350,000 digital health products available, and hype to value ratio is not always favorable in this underregulated Wild West kind of a space. And in that setting, we just have found over and over it's important to look carefully at these products and identify what's really going to deliver true clinical value. And we found that close assessment of the relevant clinical evidence is one of the best tools we have to do that. And we've been privileged to partner with Digital Medicine Society in development of novel tools to support a robust set of capabilities in that area to perform those evidence assessments. And we just find over and over that the details really matter in identifying products that truly move the needle on the health of our members.
And Fred mentioned there needs to be a financial ROI. You guys are far from the entirety of that conversation, but you're part of that conversation too. I'm curious, and perhaps it's obvious, but you guys are now expert in this space in terms of establishing what good clinical evidence looks like. Can you talk to me about maybe connecting those two, which is why it's so important for you guys to be leading in this space, from the clinical effectiveness side, how you've, as much as you can share, how you've done it, and why we should sort of be leaning on you guys here to lead this conversation.
Yeah, so a lot of directions we could go with that. One thing that I will say is that ROI estimates often are built on questionable assumptions regarding clinical impact. And so we often don't even get to the discussion about ROI because at times the clinical impact just isn't there that is used to build the ROI case. And look, we really focus heavily on our North Star, which is the health of our members. If these scalable kinds of interventions really move the needle on chronic disease for real, then they are generally, in many cases, favorable from an ROI perspective. But often that clinical impact isn't there, and that's what it comes back to over and over. And sometimes we see products where, the ROI is not favorable, but it's just the right thing for the health of our members. We call that good spend. And so we'll go to bat and encourage adoption of that thing that costs money, but will improve our members' health.
And I'll jump in here too, just to add a little bit in terms of how the sausage is made in the background. While we're so pleased to be able to recognize developers like Perks Health and Tomorrow, there's a large number of companies who we've had the privilege of working with and helping them understand why they're not there yet with respect to the dime seal. And I think, wearing the sort of hat of somebody who's trying to build a company, that's super helpful too. It's not just a no. And I think what's so unique about this collaboration with Elevance and Dime Seal is it's not a no and good day to you. It's here's what's missing. And it's probably overstating it to say it's a full-on roadmap of what it is you need to do and how you should spend your money. But boy, is it helpful to start to understand and contextualize where you are and where you need to start to get to that level of clinical effectiveness, so that the Freds of the world can have the appropriate conversations they need internally to go to bat for a product that they like because it meets that clinical effectiveness threshold. So that's a bit of a prideful moment, but I just wanted to share that as well. I don't think a lot of folks understand how much work goes into all of the products that go through this pathway to try and get everybody up to that level. Let me go back to you, Fred, if you don't mind. For the clinical effectiveness, what challenges have you come across, or have you seen folks in your profession come across with respect to clinical effectiveness? Like, not saying that you rely solely on the dime seal for any of the products that are coming in, though we'd be delighted for it to get to that point at someday. But what have been the challenges? How has clinical effectiveness been elusive, if it has been, for CMIOs to be able to ascertain?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the great things about actually having all these evaluations is does this product, if it follows clinical evidence, does that apply to my population, right? So just speaking a little bit about my health system, I mean, we're a smaller rural health system. We're actually on the border of Arizona. We have very interesting, diverse culture here that's not seen at a normal, academic center. So sometimes the clinical evidence doesn't fully fit, if they do their trials in a large health system versus ours. So sometimes we have to extrapolate to a little degree to sometimes we have to have conversations that, well, this didn't fit our population, you know, our payer mix is very different, our comorbidities, our Charleston morbidity index is very different, whatnot, etc. These things, then we have to have honest conversations. Hey, this is going to become a pilot. Let's see how it plays out. If it does play out properly, you know, that again turns into sustainability versus we're just going to do a 1-year contract, try out something. So I think if the evidence doesn't match completely, I mean, I don't think people should shy away from that, but honestly, it makes it significantly easier. And I think the other thing that I would pitch is that, especially for smaller health systems or even small clinics or whatnot, I mean, it's a lot of work to do this evidence research, and, you know, Dime and Elevance performing this on our behalf. I mean, it makes the conversations with our physicians, our clinicians, medical leadership, like chief medical officers. I mean, they could process these things much better because it's in an organized fashion. It's done in a way that they don't have to go onto PubMed and do a lot of that searching. So, I mean, it's a very valuable resource.
Thank you. Scott and Joe, shifting it a little bit to you here. So we've gone through a fair amount of conversation about how important this all is, how almost it feels like we're presenting this as though it's a panacea, but I know that's not necessarily the case. It's not as though you knock on the next door and they go, oh, they have this, great, let's buy you. Can you talk to me a little bit about what are the, maybe objections is too strong of a word, but what are the pushbacks you get when you try to go to the next set of potential buyers with the clinical evidence you have? What is it you see that they are asking for that is other than what you've already gone through pains to get to?
Yeah, if I just to paraphrase and make sure I have the right question, like what have we been doing? Where are the challenges, and hopefully where this Dime Seal will help?
I want to go a little bit more specific. So
Okay.
as you're knocking on the next door,
Oh,
and I'm being overly reductive here, you've done this enough times now to have folks say the clinical your clinical effectiveness, you know, it seems like you've done a lot, but it's not really what we were looking for here. What is the not really we were looking for here that you guys have seen? What does that kind of a conversation sound like to you guys?
I think for us, we started very early with probably too much evidence early. You know, we probably were a little nerdy up front. We probably could have learned a little bit more before we did those early ones. So I think people believe that we have good, solid evidence. I think the challenges are we have competitors who will throw up totally different numbers, but maybe those are responder rates. Maybe those are a smaller study. Maybe those were with a specific high-risk population, right? I mean, so I think one of the challenges is the details, the fact that everyone cares about evidence, but, you know, anyone with a PowerPoint can show you what we believe our evidence is right now based on our current population or based on this client study or based on this clinical trial. And you can, I think, yeah, how do you convey that message in a way that doesn't get lost in the details? Because people want to know how to easily compare you, but it's not easy. It's not easy. You have to dive in and kind of look at what you're comparing. And I think that's a real challenge. And that's, to be real, that's what we're hoping the Dime Seal will help with a little bit. You know, Jordan brought up cessation. Everyone knows smoking's bad for you. We have lots of evidence that shows it works. And every competitor in our space is trying to solve this big, hard problem. And I hope we're all working on it full bore all the time. But, you know, if I show a huge randomized control trial and somebody else shows a pilot study with a controlled group, well, I'd rather show my pilot study against their pilot study, right? I mean, I think that challenge of comparable data is super hard for us. And then the other piece is kind of tied to what I said earlier about the evidence. Will it work with my population? In which I think Fred was saying, right? great, this is great, but oh, I'm not public health. Will it work with these employees? Or we have a different type of group, or, that kind of thing. And then that last part about ROI. I mean, it's one of the things I would say if I had gone back and had the opportunity to do like my giant study, on that product again, I would have tried to work in some better health economics measures in there. It doesn't really fit with what like the NIH wants to fund, but it fits with if we ever want to get these things out of the lab and produce more than a paper at the end. If we want to produce a product that actually has real world sustainability, then it has to be sustainable without more grants or more pilots or more funds, right? It has to prove a value in the world, and I'm afraid to say not just to the patient, unless it's enough that the patient will pay for it. So that was a long answer. Scott?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you covered a lot of it. I mean, on the kind of like for like comparison and like the challenges of going to like much more robust evidence, but then being compared against maybe less robust evidence, I think actually the first slide I think Jordan pulled up, which it kind of made me resonated in a big way. Like we often talk about Perks, and we've even learned not to describe Perks as an engagement platform, even though what we do really effectively is engage patients daily, keep them consistently engaged and sticky. But I think one of the things we've learned is by describing ourselves as that, we get compared to a lot of people who are making claims about engagement in the market, but with very little to back it up and with a lot of cherry picked statistics. So I think the second or third slide Jordan picked of like choosing the kind of actual, very end of the bell curve where we've kind of learned to actually take a step back, even in that first pitch, which can kind of be hard if you've got like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, but to actually say like, this is what we really believe is like engagement actually consists of a number of things. And it's not just, a cherry pick statistic of what, engagement looks like, or the fact that, 80% of people completed the program. But then if you kind of dig a little deeper, only 5% of people who were offered the program actually enrolled in the program. And so therefore you get a very skewed statistic when it comes to completion rates in the program. And so we've kind of learned that, if you kind of just skip over that, you kind of share your headline numbers, like everyone can share some headline numbers. And unless you kind of really take the ownership of like scratching into the detail and saying, look, probably what you're going to hear from some of the other solutions in the market is this big headline number. But if you dig a little bit deeper, this is probably how it shakes out. I think that's very, very true. And like, how do you condense all of the robust clinical evidence or all of the robust analysis that you've done into a pithy 2-minute slide is really tricky and can kind of make you feel undifferentiated or seem undifferentiated versus other solutions out there. And then I'd say that kind of, on the ROI piece, it's similar. I think one of the challenges we definitely recognize is that because we wanted to do the research independently and have, the university, a university kind of run the independent randomized control trial, what they thought was interesting was very different to what a health plan or a healthcare system thought was interesting. And like they weren't even capturing data around like hospitalizations, for example. They were very focused around like other endpoints, which is fine. I mean, part of the, you have to kind of give up some of that control when you're doing an independent piece of research. But to Joe's point, like if I could go back again and have make some suggestions in that direction of like, hey, it might be helpful to capture like ED visits or hospitalizations because that's the type of data that will be really important when we come to ROI discussions. We're fortunate now to have actually run almost RCTs within our customers who obviously have like clear endpoints that are much more aligned with that return on investment. But I think early on we were like, we've got this fantastic independent RCT, everyone will be really interested in it. And then when the ROI discussion came, it was like, well, unfortunately, we couldn't really choose that endpoint in the study because we kind of relinquished control to make it sure it was independent. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there, but I think that's probably kind of where we bump up. And then the final point, which I think Fred and Joe both mentioned, was just really thinking about the population and making sure that your research ideally is done in at least comparable or similar population to the customers you're trying to sell to. Like I remember there was a statistic that we often talk about in our sales discussions that I think it's about 65% of individuals in digital health trials, whatever that kind of might be, or any sort of research, are under the age of 35. And so if you're going and pitching to a Medicare Advantage plan with, this data based on, how a 25-year-old uses your product, like you're not surprisingly going to be met with a bit of skepticism around like this digital product that is really popular in like with 20, 30-year-olds, is that going to work in a Medicare population? And so I think that's just really important. We've spent a lot of time actually not just doing that initial RCT of like, does the product have clinical effectiveness, but then also looking into subpopulations and saying, okay, how does this work with the low health literacy population? How does this work with people with multiple chronic conditions or people who have lower incomes or are older, and actually really understanding the nuance of the population that you're piloting or trialing with and how that matches the customer population.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Scott. And that actually, if I can flip it to you, Jordan, a little bit, as well as keeping an eye on the time, what I'd love to understand maybe as a takeaway for those other developers on the line here is, you represent the clinical effectiveness arbiter on this call, Jordan, conceptually. What is it that you see as missing most that comes and lands in your lap when you're like, oh, again, we're not seeing this, right?
There are many items, often so many uncontrolled designs. Missing data missingness, excuse me, is often a concern. Lack of pre-registration is often a concern, and many others. Evidence-defined framework gives a list of those. Encourage folks to check out that list. One parting thought would be that the bar for evidence quality is increasing over time. And so I would encourage digital health developers, as you're creating a strategy for evidence generation, to consider, skating to where the puck is going, not where it is right now. And a year, 2 years from now, the evidence requirements, if trends continue, will exceed what is the case currently. And we really look closely at those details in the evidence, because they matter when we're trying to find products that are going to improve our members' health.
So I wanted to try one quick thing here, and I recognize we don't have a lot of time. We're just 5 of us hanging around at a table. Nobody's listening in. It's not a big deal. We've got payer, provider, and developers. What's the burning question that you always wanted to ask the other group? Does anybody have one of those? You don't have to, don't feel pressure to. I'm throwing this in there just to see if there was somebody wanted to jump in on that.
I would say for us, one of the things we found is this moving target. When we first started, if you have evidence that it works, that'll be, then we'll take you. Oh, well, has anyone else used you? Can you replicate that? Will they pay you? Can you replicate that? Oh, do you have this study now? I think if you're not careful, you can end up chasing, and every client is different about what they care about a little bit, right? So you really have to look at who you're trying to sell to, and really try to figure out what you think is important with the input from those groups, but not try to chase too much, because it's just a moving target. Because we say the same thing, is that we always want it to be better. And sometimes it has to be good enough for the purpose it is, right? You have to say, okay, we now have enough, this is good enough to move forward with. Doesn't mean you're done, but it does mean you have to make some decisions along the way. Sorry.
So thank you, Joe. With that, let me bring us to a close. I really appreciate everybody's time. I want to remind the folks on the call here that DIME is currently talking to partners about our upcoming common mental health, our digital measures development for common mental health disorders. This is a project that we are building the partner group for now. If you're interested in learning more, please check out the QR code and let us know about it. And thank you. QR code here again as well. If you are interested in DIME Seal, if you want to know more about it or the collaboration we have with Elevance, Or again, frankly, if any of you on the call have questions for these folks, please don't hesitate to ping me. My email's up on the screen. I'm more than happy to route it to these folks. Thank you, panelists, very much for your time and patience in going through this. I really appreciate the insights and the conversation. And thank you, everybody, for listening in here today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.